Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective. This is Think Design Stories. In this series, we will be going behind the scenes on one of the most iconic laptop brands ever conceived and is still going strong. Tom Hardy's career is a distinguished one. Tom spent over 22 years with IBM as an industrial designer, design center manager, and corporate IBM design program director. During that time, he worked on various projects from advanced single-user computers to development of the IBM personal computer. One of his advanced projects was an industrial design model of IBM's Scamp, considered by PC Magazine to be the world's first personal computer prototype. Tom was the corporate IBM design program director during development of the very first ThinkPad, Model 700C, and collaborated with IBM industrial design consultant Richard Sapper. After IBM, Tom founded the consultancy Verbal Visual Framework and worked with several key brands such as Coca-Cola, Ford, Lenovo, Lowe's Maytag, Microsoft, Polaroid, Porsche, Procter & Gamble, Samsung, Tupperware, Verizon, and Xerox. Tom's work has been cited in numerous books and publications, including Times Magazine's Top 50 Most Influential Gadgets of All Time, and has won international awards for product design over the years. Currently, Tom is a professor and graduate coordinator of design management at the Savannah College of Art and Design. Thank you once again, Mr. Hardy, for agreeing to speak with me today. I know that we've got a few questions to work through, and the very first one that I actually wanted to start with is just getting a bit of history about how you started at IBM and kind of how that happened.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for reaching out. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite product experiences in my career was the original ThinkPad, the 700C. And with regards to how I started at IBM, I studied industrial design at Auburn University. And when I graduated, I went to work at IBM in Poughkeepsie, New York. Excuse me, on large systems, back in, and this was in 1970, so there was no such thing as a personal computer in the industry at that point. And so Poughkeepsie was kind of the center of large systems, and I did work on looking at future systems, which included knowing that the technology was going to get smaller. For example, displays were going to get thinner. IBM had this wonderful resource in IBM Research, and we would take advantage of that and get insight from those folks whose job it was to look at technology. They weren't product oriented per se. That was the product division's job. So IBM Research's role was to look at technology and develop innovation in the context of the company's business model and where it was going to be going in the technology industry. And so we got a lot of insights from them. So we would use that to start developing some design concepts of where this might go and how we might be prepared for that, in the future when it happens. And so I worked in Poughkeepsie for a little over 3 years. And then I got the opportunity to transfer to a completely different geographical environment in Boca Raton, Florida. IBM had just opened a development laboratory there. And one of the areas they were working on was this new business group called entry-level systems. At that point, it was small business. So as technology was moving down and getting smaller, it was not yet to the personal computer level yet of products. It was still business oriented, sort of the front end of large systems or large medium-sized systems, for example, workstations, custom products. There are a lot of really interesting custom products such as for maritime systems, an engine room console for a huge super tanker, super freighter, portable dialysis machines, and other types of products where the main IBM product was a processor unit. But all the applications needed specific products. Some could be mainstream products that IBM had, but in a lot of cases, large customers would want to customize things. So that was really exciting because we got into quite a variety of products, that product ideas that way. And so I guess shortly after I moved to Boca Raton, Florida, there was an executive, his name was Bill Lowe, and I looked at Bill as the father of the IBM personal computer, frankly. In 1970, around 1973, he funded a project in the Los Gatos, California research lab. Again, the folks out there that were working on technology. IBM Research had various laboratories around the world in New York and California and Switzerland and other places, in Japan. And he chose the one in California based on the skills that were there, because Mr. Lowe knew that technology was going in the direction of basically creating a personal computer type of business. Now, personal computer the term wasn't even in the vernacular back then. We called it single user computers. Because before that, everything was on the mainframe. If you had a terminal in front of you, a display, it was a dumb display, just a monitor. It wasn't like what we have today that's got intelligence in it. You plug it into the wall and you can have a computer in one box with a display. Back then, everything was off the mainframe system. And it's interesting that today the cloud sort of starts to come back, in a sense, to some of that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. But anyway, Mr. Lowe really had the insight into what was going to happen. And so he wanted to have a project that he could take up the chain in IBM corporate management and start to sell the idea that this is a business that's coming and we should start to think how we're going to get into that kind of scenario planning, if you would, and a number of years down the road. And so the group in IBM Research in Los Gatos created a prototype, a one of a kind. It was called SCAMP, SCAMP. The acronym, it's a technology acronym, and I don't remember exactly what I could never remember what it was. I know SCAMP, but I never memorized the long acronym. At any rate, and it's in the Smithsonian now. And PC Magazine labeled it the world's first personal computer. Now, it wasn't sold. It was not the first personal computer that was sold. It was a prototype. But what they did, they took, I think it had a 5-inch display in it. It had a data cartridge, like a cassette cartridge, but had a data. It had a keyboard and processor. And they emulated a big mainframe operating system into a smaller operating system. And it was the only box at that time that you could take and put on your desk and plug into the wall and do real computing on. It did not go to the mainframe. So it was powerful enough and had the right components to be labeled the world's first personal computer. So engineering created this prototype that was large, because they were using a lot of off-the-shelf stuff to make this, and it really wasn't designed to follow IBM's design language and the design program that we had. It was strictly to show the technological feasibility of putting all that stuff in one box. So I was asked by management to do an industrial design concept at Scamp. So I studied the technology that they had in there, and then I created a model. I had a model built of one that was smaller. It had a little bit larger screen. It had a coupler because there was no internet back then. Mm-hmm. It didn't hit publicly until about 1993. So there was no internet for the public then, but you could send data over telephone lines. So you put the receiver or the phones back then on the coupler, and then it was a keyboard. I used for the keyboard, I used a touch panel technology that we had developed at IBM for large and medium-sized computer control panels that might be made up of, you could have anywhere from 20 to 50 or so buttons and lights, maybe even more, depending on the size of the product. So each one of those buttons and lights was a discrete product number. So wow. There's an engineer in Poughkeepsie, his name was Tom Harris, and Tom had developed the touchscreen technology, which is similar to what we do today on our phones, except it wasn't conductive, with our fingers. It was a piece of Mylar with all the graphics of the buttons and the LED lights under it, indicated on the top, color-coded, just like a real control panel would be. And underneath was a switch, a thin mechanical switch on the board. So from a cost standpoint, it was significant because it was one piece of Mylar printed with all the button materials and the graphics, as opposed to 100 or so part numbers for controls. But for keyboards back then, excuse me, with the mechanical keyboard was still the mode of operation in the 70s. We got into electronic keyboard later in the 1970s, early 80s. But back then it was mechanical. And so for high entry data, you needed a mechanical throw for the technology, and they had to be a certain number of millimeters apart. A lot of human factors went into that. And so, but I used the flat panel on this keyboard for this concept of a future personal computer. One, to make it look future, because that flat panel technology was not used everywhere around the world. IBM used it on select products, and a lot of other companies didn't use anything like that. So it made it look future, and it was simple. And so Mr. Lowe took that model and together with the engineering prototype, up the chain through IBM senior management to try to gain some interest in the personal computer business, or the single computer business that we called it back then, that was coming down the road. So of course he got interest in it, but there was no market had developed yet for those types of products. And IBM's business model was, the market needs to develop to a point, because it was a company that large. I mean, at one point when I was there, we had 450,000 people, I think, in about 160 countries. So a huge organization. So obviously it takes some funding to support a machine like that, right? And so they had certain constraints in terms of what kind of products they would get into, and when they would do it, based on what the market was. And it was a valid strategy for business model. So as time went on and technology started changing, then Mr. Lowe came to me, and I was assigned to him as sort of his personal designer, if you would. So in addition to the main products I was doing for IBM for the product plan that were going to be manufactured, then I would do these one-off ideas and build a model and give it to him. And then he would, again, take it through the system. So I probably did about, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe six or eight of those over time between 1973 and 1980. Some of those are in a book. It was published several years ago called Delete. It's about it's computer vaporware is the term that the author used. Paul Atkinson is an author from the UK, and we had a mutual friend in London who, it turns out, he knew that I had worked on some of these early computer products, and Paul was putting together a book on different companies that did these products to help sell an idea, not necessarily intended to be manufactured per se, but to use for strategy and illustrate what could be. And so he contacted me and asked me if I had worked on some of those things, and I said I had. And so he wanted to meet me, and we got together, and I showed him some of these things, and by that time they weren't confidential anymore, you know. And he really liked the content, and so he got IBM's permission to use them and to print them. So they're now, I think, about 3 of them are in this book.
Very cool.
And I'm probably the only one who had photographs, still had photographs of this, because this was a one-off small project in a laboratory, and it wasn't a product that IBM had. It wasn't in IBM archives. It was just this singular model done for one executive for show and tell, and so thank goodness I still had slides, because that was a slide days, 35 millimeter. I still had slides in a box in my attic. The IBM archives didn't even, had no idea what this stuff was. And so I was delighted that we finally saw the light of day on all this work that we did. And looking back on it, it was really interesting. We had to make a lot of assumptions back then. And some of the photographs that we shot in the studio for Mr. Lowe to carry or send around in addition to the model, I used my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, as a future customer.
Oh, okay.
And there were some shots we had where we put a glass of milk and some cookies, next to this computer, which is plugged into a television set, which it could be a monitor or it could be a TV set. And then she was using the keyboard on this thing, and they were colored. Some were yellow, and that code name was Yellowbird. We did some that were blue and that were red. And it was trying to give the indication that this was a consumer type of product. We also built a mock-up of what a computer store could be. In IBM's case, the only product that was sold to a retail store was a typewriter and some dictation equipment that they had back then out of the Office Products Group. And then, of course, ribbons, supplies that went to products. But there weren't any computer products per se that were sold in a store until the personal computer came along. But we knew that was going to be the mode, that these things would have to be sold at, not just using IBM sales force, which was the model all the way up to that point. All IBM products were sold by professional IBM salespeople. So we made a mock-up of what the store could look like, and then we put a lot of products on it and photographed it with a group of people, including my daughter, as customers that would come in and look at these little single-user computers. That was exciting to work on those things. And like I said, I was really pleased that it got out of the box. And it was that people could actually see some of this work that's going on. And the book just doesn't cover IBM stuff. It covers a lot of different companies. You know, it's a unique book. I think it's still, you can still buy it.
I have to try and track one down.
Yeah, I think you can get on Amazon or any bookstore probably still has that. And so that leads me, that kind of starts to lead me into the personal computer introduction at IBM. So having worked behind the scenes on all these ideas for Mr. Lowe, the last one that I did, which is also in the book, was based on an Atari platform. So he wanted me to go to Atari in California and look at the Atari 800, which was like a cartridge, game cartridge, little product. And there was only one person that knew I was from IBM. So I was to be discreet about where I was from, because they didn't want the Wall Street media to think the IBM and Atari were dancing together or whatever. And so I went out and I learned about the product from this fellow, and then I brought one back with me, and so I had to make a model using the electronic platform. So I had to make a design that didn't look like Atari. Mm-hmm. It would look like an IBM. And that's the first time we put IBM personal computer, press typed it on the cover next to the IBM logo. And I changed the form. The Atari was rather angular, and it was more of a kind of a tan color. So I changed it to white, put an IBM keyboard in it, and with a few color keys, and then put radiuses. I softened up the form, the overall form, to make it look, not only to make it look different than the Atari thing and try to just separate the perception of that, but to give it a more of a human flavor, a little more emotion into it. And so I created that model and gave it to Mr. Lowe. He took it back up the chain, and he went in to the CEO of IBM and other senior management, and basically said, this was a way for us to get into the personal computer business quick, was to basically buy Atari. And this was an example of what we could do with it. Now, the reason that they were looking at getting into it quickly was that they waited a long time, because the first product called a personal computer that was sold was the Altair 8080, I think was the number, in 1975. Now, it didn't have a keyboard, it didn't have a display. It had toggle switches or red LED lights, and you could program the toggle switches so the lights did different things, So somebody here said, ooh, they did compute. Yeah, I know. It sounds kind of stupid now, but back then, that was that was looked at as being computing in a box that you could plug in the wall, not tied into a mainframe. In fact, that is the product that pulled Bill Gates away from Harvard. And he and, I think it was Paul Allen, was in school with him. They went out to Albuquerque and started this little company that was working on operating systems for the guy, and eventually I guess they put a keyboard and displays with it later. And that was the beginning of Microsoft. So, and so after that product came out and people started really, gravitating to this. Of course, there were hobbyists back then. That was a point in time in the computer business, technology business. where the hobbyists were taking pieces similar to what the IBM researchers did in Los Gatos, and put together their own homebrew, if you would, computer. In fact, Homebrew Computer Club was the name of the local hobbyist group in Palo Alto, California, and that's where Steve Jobs and Wozniak met during that club. And so the hobbyists started creating these things, and then there was a ton of startups that started. You know, everybody wanted to jump in the business because they could see where this was going now. But IBM kept saying the market hasn't developed yet, so we're going to wait. Fundamentally, wait till the market develops, and then we'll go in and and take it. I mean, that was a business model. And so, about 1980, there were shareholders, and the financial area was asking, where's IBM's personal computer? And so there was some pressure to make one quickly. So anyway, the Atari was put on the table. It's a way to do it quick. And from what I heard, the CEO, in essence, I'm not quoting what he said, but in essence, he basically said, are you crazy for doing something like this? So, something to the effect of, what would the media and our stockholders say if the largest computer company in the world had to go buy a little company like Atari to make our own personal computer? Mm. And so Mr. Lowe pulled out Plan B and said, we can do it in 12 months inside if you give us the right to streamline the development process, because in IBM typically it's a multi-year process because of a lot of different reasons, testing, and a lot of validation that they did, which was good. But for a product like this, you really didn't need that stringent a process that had been used for larger, more sophisticated products. And they also said we need the right to fundamentally run over people, around people, around the bureaucracy in a big company like that. They weren't going to run around things like safety and key things, but they got the right to do that. So then that group was formed in Boca Raton, Florida. There was a product manager, a director, Don Estridge, who was assigned to run that. And Mr. Lowe moved up to another level of executive. And then I was assigned as the industrial designer of IBM's first PC that came out in 1981, because I'd been working with Mr. Lowe on all these little projects. So that was nice that they assigned me to that. And that in itself was an experience. A lot of war stories on that. Some good, bad, and indifferent ones. It was kind of crazy. Things were happening. So,
after the recording of this interview, Tom Hardy shared with me one of these war stories, and it involved the monitor that shipped with the system. Originally, a brand new design for the monitor had been done, but to save costs, IBM chose to go with an existing monitor. In his words, PC Program Management originally forecasted that the sale of the 1981 IBM PC would be 200,000 units per year for 5 years. In actuality, IBM sales reached 200,000 per month by the second year. As a result, new monitor tooling had to be built anyway, since the older display writer tooling would not physically hold up under the new significant quantities needed. Hence, the overall result of the display writer monitor decision was in fact no cost savings and a mediocre monitor appearance for an important IBM product. IBM Design Management had initially argued against using display writer, but lost because of the assumed cost and time savings from no new tooling needed.
And so after I did that product, I got offered a management job in IBM Lexington, Kentucky. And so I worked on designing products for 10 years. That was about my 10th year of designing products. So I sold my soul to management and moved to Lexington. And in Lexington, they were still making typewriters, just electric typewriters, and a whole line of different ones, because the personal computer, I was up there before the personal computer was announced. I left Boca after my design work was done, and all turned over to engineering for manufacturing and so forth. They were making keyboards, getting into electronic keyboards, and a lot of supplies and other products there. So I had to start a new design center that that followed in the footsteps of Elliot Noyes, who was the IBM corporate consultant that Tom Watson Jr., who was the CEO, starting in 1955. He took over from his father, Thomas Watson Sr., who was the founder of IBM. And Mr. Watson decided that he wanted to make design part of his legacy. So he brought in Elliot Noyes, who was an architect and an industrial designer, who had actually been working on an IBM typewriter with an outside consultant. He and Mr. Watson, it turned out, knew each other in the Pentagon during World War II. So yeah, it was interesting. I think their offices were right next to each other in that part of their life. There's some interesting stories about that. But at any rate, so Elliot came in and assessed the situation and brought in Paul Rand, to preeminent graphic designer, to help shape the graphic identity of the company, to reshape it, and then brought in Charles Eames to work on communicating technology in the company through exhibitions and films. But back then, technology was a mystery. Again, there weren't any personal computers, particularly in the 1950s. And technology was seen by the public as some mysterious thing, in a locked computer room somewhere, because that's where most of those things were. What did they do? Are they going to control our lives? And so what Eames' job was to take the technology and humanize it and show how the technology can help the quality of life, agriculture, medical, and so on and so forth, a lot of different case studies. So anyway, that group of consultants are what started to build the IBM product and brand identity into a contemporary looking and working company. Because before that, their products, for example, in graphics, were all over the place. And they were old, and they actually didn't match the advanced technology that the company was developing. So it was this dichotomy that the visual image of the corporation didn't match what it was doing, and that's what Mr. Watson wanted to fix. So Elliot, in his office, it was in New Canaan, Connecticut. He had an industrial design firm there, and he kept the typewriter in his office because that was the IBM consumer product. It was a business machine, but it could also be used in the home as a personal typewriter. So he kept all those office division consumer products designed in his office, and he dealt directly with Lexington that made those products. Whereas the rest of IBM products were done by internal designers in multiple design centers around the world. At the time, I was asked to create one in Lexington, and this, by the way, this followed Elliot's death in 1977. He died early, unfortunately, and unexpectedly. And so they wanted to have a design center there with internal staff, just like they had at 14 other ones around the world, Japan, all over Europe, and all over the United States. And so my job was to create a new facility and hire staff and all that, which is really quite interesting as my first management job. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that I moved from designing products into management, was because that was an interesting challenge, was to build something from the ground up. And so, excuse me. And so that's when I started working with Richard Sapper. Richard Sapper was brought in late 1980 to replace Elliott. And Richard was a German designer that he moved to Italy. I don't know, several years after he graduated, he worked for Mercedes, and then decided to go to Italy. And he teamed up with some Italian designers, preeminent ones. Marco Zaniso was one of them, and they designed a lot of products jointly. And then he opened up his own studio in Milan. And he had never designed a computer before. But IBM design management at that point in corporate really respected his intellect, and he had this wonderful combination of being a German designer with functionality and rationality, but he had the Italian flair and the surprise in his products. So it was this really nice mix that you didn't find everywhere like that. So they didn't care if he'd never designed a computer before. In fact, they thought that was an advantage. He didn't come up that way. He was smart enough to do that. There wasn't a problem. So he, the first product that he was asked to do was a product that I had in my laboratory of an advanced typewriter. And when I got to that location, I did an assessment of all the stuff that was in development to try to find out what had been going on. And there was close to a 3-year lapse between the time that Elliott died and the time that Richard came in and the design center came in. So there are some people in his office that were following up with the engineering groups in Lexington, because of the products were still going on, that they had designed. That would happen for another probably a couple of years. But unfortunately, it turned out that nobody was looking at the advanced stuff that the engineers were doing. Because when you had a design center associated with a development lab at all these other locations, and most of them had manufacturing there as well, so the designers were really close on a day-to-day basis with all the engineers and weren't remote. So IBM had and still has a decentralized design program, but it's managed from a centralized location. But there's a lot of coordination involved in something like that. So not having a design center on a day-to-day basis where you could see what was going on, and you could hear some talk about what was going on, then they were developing a new ribbon technology called resistive ribbon, which was non-impact. This ribbon was charged, and the ink would kind of fly through the air to hit the paper. It's just amazing technology. It was like the next biggest thing in that product business area after the ball. IBM's selectric typewriter with the famous type ball. And that IBM typewriter with the ball was the first time that the platen didn't move, because on typewriters from the beginning of when those products were designed, the keys were the type bars, and the platen moved as you were typing. The platen moved and the paper moved. And so the ink ribbon was in the same place. With the ball moved and rotated, and the platen stayed in place. And that's why the selected typewriter that Elliott designed, this beautiful product, it's like a sculpted, this beautiful sculpted form, like a singular form. It didn't have to have a separate thing in the back that slid back and forth like the plat. So anyway, the Selectric was a huge step in electronic typewriter design. And this resistive ribbon offered a similar opportunity to do something design-wise that would reflect this innovation. So what we wanted to do was to use that as an example of IBM taking this technology and doing something really sort of radical, because in the company, you know, you can get hung up in, well, not hung up's probably not the right word to use, because systems are really important in that corporation. And so but sometimes you need to break the rule, or you need to do something, you know, get out of the box a little bit to show that you're doing something different. And it's not just the same old stuff. And so this was an opportunity to do that. So I've got approval from corporate to use Richard on the project, and he came back with a concept he called the upright typewriter. It was never built. But that was my first management job, working with Richard on the advanced project like that. So because the ribbon didn't have to be oriented to the platen like all typewriters do, you could bend it. And so he created this typewriter, which was like a parallelogram. And it brought the point of typing closer to the eye. It was great for ergonomics. It looked this beautiful, unusual product. And so we took that in to engineering, and of course they were astounded at what the concept that he did. But they also said, we can't do it because we've been working in the back room on this technology, and we got a lot of things that are oriented like traditional typewriters. You know, the print head being in a certain direction and the keyboard relationship and all this, more of a horizontal typewriter rather than turning it all up at an angle. They didn't say they couldn't do it. They basically made the argument that the typewriter business is going down, which was true because PC is coming up, PC and a printer, you know, and you can do letters and much more with a personal computer and a printer than you can with a typewriter. So they knew that the business was going down, and they calculated that for them to go back and redo what they had done, to put it in this orientation would be too expensive. So corporate design escalated it. It's a process in IBM where you can escalate something. It's like going to court. You go up to the next level of management, and if you win that, you go to the next one, and you can ultimately get to the CEO with an issue. And so they took it up the chain, and the Lexington business unit made the argument that I just kind of talked about, was the expense of doing that versus the life of the typewriter. Of course, part of our argument was, okay, we all understand that, but this is a brand image piece that has value beyond just the value of getting the product out the door and how many people you sell it to. This is going to get a lot of notoriety because it's so unusual and it's really different. And it's got all these advantages. And Richard Sappler did it. And, you know, Richard has more designs in the permanent collection in the Museum of Modern Art in New York than any other designer in the world. A lot of people don't know that. And a lot of people don't know actually who Richard was. Like, they know his products, the products that he did, but he wasn't like you know, other designers that go out and have a PR firm, and you know, they do all this whiz bang stuff and wear capes or whatever the trick is that the image they're trying to make about being a flamboyant designer. Richard was just really low key, and did the work, and didn't try to promote himself at all. So at any rate, we lost that one. And that takes me, in terms of my career that you asked me about, the long-winded way of explaining how I got into IBM. Through my early days, and then up to working on the personal computer concepts, and then into the original PC, and then moving into to management at the design center. But Lexington is also the first time that I worked with Paul Rand, because all those consumer products, which were the supplies, the ribbons and ink and a lot of other things, those were sold in consumer supply stores. So we wanted the packaging to be consumer product, color, really interesting on the shelf. And so, of course, Paul did all of the major corporate identity work. So when I got to Lexington, he was the consultant already doing that work. So I moved into giving him projects, which was a priceless experience. I probably worked with Paul, because after Lexington, I went to corporate office for probably about 13 years. And it was an unbelievable experience sitting across the table from that man. He was a tough critic. One of the toughest critics I ever sat in front of. But you respected him, but he was right. And he didn't try to play politics. He didn't need IBM as a client. He was successful. And IBM tried to get individuals like that, like Richard and Paul and so forth, because they were direct and honest. And they would tell us what they thought was right or wrong. You know, they weren't looking to keep the contract going for another 5 years to support a big design office. Richard was by himself, Paul was by himself. So I remember one time coming into a meeting with Paul. His studio was at his house in Weston, Connecticut, and he was still meeting with one of our designers, looking at his portfolio, because we tried to send our designers up to Paul once a year and have him give a critique of their work. It really helped the thing to do. And so in Paul's house, when he met with him on projects, she met with him at the dining room table. When he came in the door, it was over to the right. And you could go around and sit in the living room to wait. Then there were no walls, so you could hear what was going on around the corner. So when he got through with this designer's work, he asked him how old he was. And I think the designer said something like, I'm 35 or something like that. And Paul said, well, you still have time to be good. Now, I'm sure that destroyed the designer's ego, because the designer probably, I'm gonna grab it down with IBM. I've made it now, and all this. But if you thought about it, that was a compliment, because there was hope. You know, if the guy was doing lousy work, Paul would have told him that, and he said, you know, like, who hired you or something. I don't know if he would have said that exactly, but something to the effect of, or I don't know. I don't think he'd go so far as to say you should be driving a bus, but there would have been something like that. Paul had this wonderful way of getting his points across, and so I'm sure that guy left there within depressed, but again, that there was hope for him in Paul's mind. And there was a time when I had been a meeting with him after he had a meeting with a designer like that, and Paul was aware that he was tough, you know. So after he was tough, I know he asked me once. He said, "Do you think I was too hard on that guy?" But when he does it, he focused on it. He was focusing on design excellence, and the bar of excellence was Paul Rand. That was Paul Rand's bar of excellence, right? So anyway, a lot of experiences with him. It was just like getting a PhD in graphic design. I don't claim that. PhD in graphic design, but it was like that in terms of the depth and exposure to knowledge of that man. Sometimes he would pull out things that he was working on for somebody else, maybe two alternatives, and ask you which one you like the best. Now, if you selected the one that he liked better, it made you feel really good, you know. Hey, I'm getting it now. So Paul's teaching, which, by the way, that's what all that 13 years was, with this incredible education. But if you chose the one he didn't prefer, you say, well, why did you choose that one? You know, of course, they were both great because he did them, right? But I learned to try to turn that around if I could on him, because he taught graphic design in the graduate school at Yale. So he was for many years, he was a teacher. And I tried to turn it around and ask him why he didn't like it. And then he would get in a teaching mode. And it was, that was just incredible stuff. I miss all that. He was a wonderful man. Let's see. Okay. So where do you want to go from here?
Well, I feel like I just got a crash course on not only IBM design history, but computer history in general. So, wow, thank you. If it's okay with you, how if we move into some of the more ThinkPad specific questions?
Okay.
So we've got a pretty good idea of how your journey started at IBM, and kind of where you transitioned from role to role, and even some of the people that you worked with up to kind of the development of the ThinkPad platform. But how did that get started, and how did you get involved with the development of ThinkPad?
Okay, well, in my last position at IBM was basically the corporate manager of the IBM design program. So that meant I had to coordinate, among other things, those 15 design centers around the world. And this was all before the internet, so we were on airplanes constantly. But in retrospect, it was wonderful because we got to visit the cultures where all these design centers were, in Japan, all over Europe, all over the United States. So, but it was an incredible task given the scale of that company. So, of course, as part of that, excuse me, at that point in time, the PC business had already been established in, as I mentioned, in Boca Raton, Florida. But there was some early work that started in IBM Japan on packaging some small products. And so the company started making a connection between what was going on in IBM Japan and what was going on in IBM Boca Raton, Florida. As we saw that small with laptops were coming, and even tablets, so using a stylus, little notebooks, notepads, if you would. So they started, rather than waiting, 7 years or whatever, like they did with the PC, with the market developed, they started moving pretty quickly into that business area. So in the corporate job, as part of that coordination role, we knew all the products that were going on all over the corporation. So I had a staff. I had an industrial design manager and 2 graphic design managers who dealt with graphic design. Was, a lot of it was ephemeral, except for what some of the corporate stuff, and it was a lot of material that they had to try to follow and make sure that it was being done right. And then the company threw us the interface design, back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so we were trying to make some sense out of that and trying to let programming know that design had to be part of all that, even though the resolution was lousy. But that was the beginning of design, and IBM worked on the interface. And then I developed also a department called strategic design, looking at advanced products and with a budget to do that, not just going out and trying to nickel and dime these things in individual locations, but actually having a strategy of looking at these products so we could better match them when the time was right for them to come out, rather than going through something like we did like the upright typewriter. You know, if there was a process of doing that, it could have been taught earlier and got into development as that concept, and not had the problem of trying to go back and redo technology to make it happen. So at any rate, we met with all the design centers every 3 months and reviewed all the products that they were doing. So we met for about a week at different locations around the world, and each design center manager would be there. And often they would bring 1 or 2 of their designers, rotate them, because it was good experience for the designers to see all this stuff. And then Richard from Industrial Design, Richard would come. And so we would review every product that was going on during that period of time. And we had a system of the schedule of these things. If they're on a 2-year plan, 3-year plan, or whatever, we knew, when the design had to be finalized, when it had to be released for tooling, when it was going to be launched, and all that. And so the industrial design manager on staff, his job was to track all that stuff and to work with these 15 design center managers and say that in the last review that we had of your product, there was some criticism, right? Either from Richard giving it critique, because that was what we wanted him to do. And it was also an open discussion. Other people in the room can make comments on anybody else's products. So that was a very helpful thing to do. And I had comments that I would make. So whatever was decided in that meeting relative to a specific product was documented by corporate industrial design manager. And then he tracked all that to make sure that they actually did it. Mm-hmm. And then they had to present at the next review their execution of that and what they did in response to the criticism. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in between the 3 months, there would be reviews. We didn't have the internet. We could send slides or get on airplanes. But I did streamline some of that shortly. I guess after about a year being in that job, I came across a Sony product that could send images over telephone lines. Again, the internet, this was like 1990, and the internet hadn't become public yet. It was ARPANET, between the government and universities, but it wasn't open to the public. So I found out about this Sony digital system by watching CNN and seeing the Tiananmen Square event that they had back when students were making a pro-democracy protest there. And they brought the military in Tiananmen Square to shut it down. There was some shooting going on, people were killed. But what the Chinese government did was they shut down the communications from all the TV networks that were covering this stuff live. Yet CNN was showing frame grab pictures of what had just happened. On all the other networks, the major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, they were just showing the reporter's head, a picture, because they didn't have live TV, but they didn't shut down the phone lines. The Chinese kept the phone lines open. So the reporters were reporting on that. CNN reporter was reporting too, but then he was showing an image of something that just happened. So the Chinese had no idea how they were doing this until later, but they got away with it because Sony was using CNN as a test site for this system. It would take what they called a Pro Mavica camera, one of the early professional digital cameras. The brand name was Sony Pro Mavica. It looked just like a 35 millimeter camera. So the Chinese didn't take cameras away from people. They didn't know that that one was a digital one, that they could take the card and go back and stick it into a box in their hotel room, a Sony box, to send it to Atlanta over the telephone lines, and they would get a high resolution image on the other end. And so it was fantastic. So I thought, we could use that. If I put those in corporate and some of our design centers, we could send this stuff around, put one in Richard's studio. But these things, you had to have, the sending and the receiving, you had to be exactly the same thing. And I think each pair cost 100,000, I believe, something like that. I might be wrong, but it was a high number like that. Excuse me. So I called the Sony rep in New York and found out about the system and said, I'd like to get a demonstration of that. So he said, yeah, he said, I can bring up 2 of these and we can set them in the room like they were communicating different parts of the world and do a demo. So I brought my management in and some other management that I knew would have to approve a high number in the budget, and gave them a demo of that. And they said, do it. And because I wanted to get station and corporate, one in Richard's studio in Milan, one in the studio in Japan, who's doing a lot of the work. Including the first ThinkPad was designed using this system between Richard and corporate in Japan. That was the first major product that we used this for, which is a nice ThinkPad story that really hasn't been told fully. And then we put one in Austin, Texas, so they were doing a lot of workstation stuff. And I think we may have put one in Germany. I don't remember now. But anyway, it was a good bit of money, but it was evident how productive that was going to make us. And so between Richard and corporate in Japan, we had a 24/7 thing going on. Between doing something, sending it here, then it goes there, then it comes back. So that's how ThinkPad was developed. And the way that you use this machine is you had the monitor and you had a processor, you had a tablet with a stylus. So you, in different colors you could use. So you could draw on the picture when it came on the screen. So you took the photograph with the Pro Mavica camera of a product that zoom in for details or whatever you had, and then you go in on the desk and it sent over the telephone lines to high speed, and it painted the screen. It took maybe 30 seconds or so, maybe a little bit longer, to paint the screen. And then if you put your speakerphone conference and had a conference call with the party that you were sending that to, then you basically had video conferencing. It wasn't film, but it was real images. And you could take the stylus then and draw over the picture and make comments, and the other person can make a comment. So it was interactive. And it was fantastic. We were the only design organization, only company with a big international design department like that to do that kind of virtual collaboration. So it was it was really great. And the funny thing happened. I was giving a pitch to an executive, kind of touting how design, you know, was getting really efficient in a corporation, and here's what we're doing to communicate and very productive and all the great things. You know, I was just evangelizing for the design program in my own department. And so all of a sudden the screen started, it was painted, a picture came down. It was a picture of Santa Claus. And then another picture came down beside it, and it was a picture of Jesus. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And this particular executive, it's the first time I'd met this person, and I'm not knowing what's coming next, you know. And so then when the writing would show up, it would actually kind of write itself, like the person who just wrote it on the tablet, and it said, "Whose birthday is it anyway? Merry Christmas, the Yamato Japan design team." So it was a relief actually to see that it was a little fun thing. And so of course the guy laughed, you know, the executive, and I said, I turned it into a story. I said, well, you know, see what this does, in addition to us being very efficient, this tool lets us be closer together socially. It's a nice cultural thing. The designers can interact with each other on virtually a real-time basis with a little lag going on. But that was a really fun thing. I was always afraid of somebody that was going to go in. God knows what they would put up there. But that was the only thing that ever happened like that. But it was great. So so then, and and getting the ThinkPad design done, then once we knew that there was going to be a product, a notebook product, by that time, a lot of the work had been shifted from Florida to IBM Japan. And the key designer there who was working on it was a designer, Kaz Yamazaki. And I think they had several industrial designers there. But Kaz was assigned to this product. Parallel to all this going on, there had been an image assessment piece of work, research work done by corporate communications. That happened maybe every 3 or 4 years, where they go out and they try to judge people's opinion of the company, perceptions of IBM. And so there was a reception that IBM, this was like in 1989, I think, that IBM wasn't being thought of as being an innovative company as much as it had. Mm-hmm. So that was what they called an enterprise issue. That was a big brand problem. If a company is not thought of as being, if it's been sliding in the perception of innovation. So when an enterprise issue like that happens, then management all over the country has to put together a strategy of how you're going to address that, particularly those like that were in design. It had something to do with the brand image and innovation. How are we going to ratchet that up? And so I had to put together a strategy from the corporate design program point of view of what we were going to do about it. And so Richard and I developed what we called the personality strategy. What we could do with IBM's personality within the context of what we did in industrial design to help boost that image of innovation. And so it had to do with the whole approach of the concept, form, color, details, the whole design language strategy. Excuse me. So the ThinkPad was the first product to come out of that. New personality, strategy, and attitude about it. So when the ThinkPad, which became the 700C, I think the code name for the whole system was Nectarine at one point. Then it was assigned to the Yamato, Japan laboratory. That's where they would do most of the engineering, industrial design, and manufacturing. So I wanted Richard to be involved in that product because this was going to be a significant product. It was going to be a notebook size, not a laptop size. So it was A4, which is, you know, the size of a notebook, notepad, right, writing pad, as opposed to a laptop, which was somewhat bigger than that. And this was a significant product similar to what the selective typewriter was in the history of IBM design that Elliott did. And I mean, this was not saying a bad thing about the internal designers. Yamazaki was a good designer. He was great for this project, which I think is why the laboratory design manager assigned him to this project. And he was capable of doing a really good design. But I felt like that this was going to be the beginning of a string of these products if it was successful. And so I wanted Richard to have the role in leading it. But I wanted him to work together with Yamazaki. I wanted them to work together. And so I called a meeting in Milan, Italy, and I had Yamazaki come over and meet with Richard. And I was actually in Belgium in a management school. And I had this meeting on a weekend, so I came down to Milan for that. And Richard had done a basic wooden model of this concept. He painted it black, and his metaphor for this was a bento box, a Japanese bento lunchbox. And the idea was, when it was sitting on the table, the only thing you could see was the IBM logo, IBM ThinkPad, small in the corner. You wouldn't know it was a computer, and that was the idea. You know, with a bento lunchbox, it's very simple. Simple top, simple box, and when you open it up, that's when you get the surprise of the food and the color and the texture and all that. So that was the fundamental concept of the first ThinkPad, was to do that. And so I thought it was just fantastic. But it was typical Richard Savage, making this little surprise, but making something really simple. I mean, if you look at the Tizio light, you know, behind it, this thing it's simple. It's the most flexible light ever designed. You can rotate this thing in so many different ways to get any kind of light you want, down, up, this way, that way. And so he just had this genius touch on developing concepts like that. So he and Kaz, you know, they talked about it. So we had a 2-day meeting on this whole thing, and said let's do it. So, you know, Kaz took the model back to Japan, and so by that time I had this. The Sony system had just been installed everywhere, and so he and Richard worked together, you know, on a regular basis with that stuff. I've still got some images of that in a box somewhere. Where it's got the handwriting, Richard, try this, you know, and then Yamazaki would do it and then send it back on the Sony system, and then Richard would look and there'd be different views, and Richard would write on it and send it back. Or they'd get on the phone. So the dynamics of that was fantastic because it hadn't happened like that before. I think that, again, that's one of the untold stories of the development of the first ThinkPad, how the interaction happened, you know, so fast and efficient between Milan and Japan, and then corporate. We were in Connecticut, at that time. Corporate headquarters for IBM is in Armonk, New York, Westchester County, which is just right over, right across the Connecticut line between Westchester and Fairfield County. But we had moved to Stanford there on the water at Long Island Sound because we needed space to put a lot of the products so we could have the whole product line in a room. And the corporate headquarters were for corporate executive offices and so forth. And we didn't have a space like that in that particular facility. So that's why we relocated after I was there for a year down to Connecticut. But anyway, so when the ThinkPad was going through its development process, there were a couple of things that happened with technology that design was directly responsible for. One was finding the track point device. The designer who was managing the strategic design function in my corporate department, Sam Lexington. Sam's job, among other things, was to roam the halls of IBM research and find these little jewels that were going on. Much like I was talking about how IBM design used search over time. And so he found Ted Selker, who was an IBM engineer, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the other gentleman's name right now. It'll come to me shortly. They were working on a stick, basically like a joystick, syncing via the keyboard. And I think it was primarily for gaming applications. Again, the research didn't work on products, in products. They were working on different technologies that could be transferred to products. So they were working on something to navigate rather than trying to do it with a mouse. Because we didn't have anything like the trackpads we have now on kind of the palm rest of our keyboards that we do with our finger. There was nothing like that back then. Excuse me. And so Sam saw that. And I think immediately, as a designer thinking laterally about all this, my God, that could replace a mouse on a notebook product. So he had Ted Selker and the other gentleman come over to our design center. And I had him bring it over. Richard was coming in, coincidentally, with all this. So they brought it over and they gave us a demo. And we said, can you cut this thing down and put it in the middle of the home row? Because that's the point on the QWERTY layout. Your hands don't really cross, and so you could do that without having to use a mouse, particularly on an airplane. Mm-hmm. So if you're using a notebook product on an airplane tray that comes down, then there's really not a lot of room to use a mouse and then have something to write on or whatever. So what this did, among other things, it gave you that ability to have a cursor to the screen in a confined space like that. And also in parallel to that, kind of backing up a little bit, there was a discussion initially about ThinkPad, whether it should be A4 or a little large, like laptop size. And Kaz and the other designers in Japan did what they called a concept video, where they made models of a notebook size product versus a laptop size product, and where you could or couldn't use one or the other. And I never will forget the one that I think sealed the deal was they opened up the drawer of the desk and took the A4 size and dropped it into a file folder and shut the drawer. You couldn't do that with a laptop, because A4 was the size of all the folders and the rails inside a desk drawer that held all this stuff. And that's how you locked up your and stored your computer. You couldn't do that with a laptop. And so that was one of the early industrial design actions that helped drive that product to the size it was. And so they mocked up the track point in Yamato and sold it to the program manager who was directing the first ThinkPad project. And he was wise enough to see that as a differentiating factor. And of course, if you remember, we put together this personality strategy that we needed things like this. So we were pushing it hard in parallel to Yamato designers selling it to the product guys. We were touting that up in corporate to where, for some reason, the Yamato engineering people didn't want to do it because it was too much work or there's going to be added money or whatever. We were trying to cave it in on them because it would be really important to the company to do that. But we didn't have to go to that extent because, to the credit of the Japanese product management group, they saw the benefits of it and they jammed it into the product, into the schedule. And the second thing that happened was, of course, the notebook was going to have a TFT technology flat panel display. It was going to be black. It was going to be monochrome because of the color one that they were jointly developing with Toshiba at the time. Supposedly, the mounting of it was too big to fit in A4, so they were going to put it in a follow-on laptop product. I've read a couple of stories about how the color TFT made its way into the ThinkPad 700C, and I don't remember any of that actually happening, because the way I remember it happened, there was no other company that had a notebook product with a color display in it. No. And so we said, if you can do that, oh my goodness, that is a huge differentiator and another check from the innovation perception worksheet, right? So we were in a meeting in Yamato and all this stuff was going on, this discussion about the TFT. And Richard and Kaz broke away and they got a hardware piece of the TFT that was somewhere in the lab that they were looking at for the follow-on laptop, another laptop product later. They figured out how to change the frame without affecting the technology, to make it smaller, and made it fit the A4 size. This was initiated by industrial design, specifically Kai Yamazaki and Richard Safford did this. And they took the idea into engineering and made its way to the product manager, who had agreed to put in the track point, and they jammed that into the machine. That was close to zero hour. I remember it was close to the time that everything, there's a point where everything has to shut down. And anything you can't do by that time, you do on the next model, the follow-on thing. But it was so critical as a product differentiator to do the first one like that. And it was absolutely the right decision. That's one of the things that really, made the ThinkPad what it is. And of course, IBM advertising picked up on all this, which really helped, again, the innovation perception. I know that with the red track point color, there was a headline that said, in a big picture, a detail of the red close-up shot said, ThinkPad is so hot they had to make it red. And then the TFT got all sorts of advertising, because it was so different. But anyway, we're really proud of industrial design on that product. They did a lot of things that really influenced the innovative aspects, of that. You probably already know the story about the red color.
Yeah, it was the same, Richard wanted the same color as what IBM decided was the emergency off switch.
Yeah, well, IBM, because of all the products that the company made, and this goes back to when I was working in Poughkeepsie with the large systems. You have all these products that are made around the world, and theoretically, one customer could have all these things in one big computer used by the same people, but they're made and manufactured different places around the world. So, but they had to appear and be used as they came out of one place.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be a seamless systems design. So we had color specifications and shape specifications for all the buttons. You know, nomenclature had to be consistent between machines, and indicator lights and so forth. So we had a functional color coding standard. Now, part of that was also safety related. So when we looked at once the track point was accepted into the product, then we had to pick the final color for it. Now, on our models, we made it red because Richard really liked the red. I mean, a lot of his products, including the teeth cell. The teeth cell is black and it's got a little red power switch on it, but the fasteners on the sides of those arms are red, and it's a classic combination, like details of red with black. And so we were going to try to make that happen in reality, but we knew that the functional color coding standard said a button with that function, or a control with that function, should be blue. And we mocked it up blue, and it just didn't seem like red, you know? And this was going to be a big deal in IBM advertising because it was innovation. Nobody had done something like that track point before. So how to sell it? Because I knew that safety had to approve the color that, you know, and most companies, most big companies that have products, that particularly electronic companies, the safety function has to approve every product before it's finally released to manufacturing and to the customer. So among other things, they'll go through functional color coding and look at all the controls and say, does this match this color and this color? Is the word the same here? Blah, 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 blah. So we knew that they were going to object to the red. They could kill it. So Kaji Yamasaki was instructed to put the word magenta on the drawing and to make the actual color, knock it off of red, where it could be argued that it's not red, but don't make it pink, make it close to magenta, in between if you can. Because the safety guys, they may not know what magenta is, but they'll know it's not red. So it's not going to fly in the face. We could say that it's another function color because it's not necessarily. There were certain parts of the safety piece of this that had nothing to do with some other functions. So we had some latitude in what we could do with a certain color. And this was a new thing. So anyway, but safety really had the control of where red was being used, and it was only for emergency power off on large machines. And this was far away from that in terms of what it did, you know. But it was strongly felt from our perspective. I mean, we had a bias, of course, but that this was not going to be confused with emergency power off on the big machine. So Kaz had the drawing called magenta, and he got the color put on all the parts that were going to come in to build the products, knocked off red, a magenta color. So when all these parts came in, and the safety guys going around doing the check, he sees these parts, and they're, of course, by themselves, and to him, they look red. You know, he wasn't holding it up against actually red, pure red color chip or something else, but it looked red to him. So we knew this could happen. So he calls the design manager in Japan and said, "What are you doing approving a red cursor control? It's not a power switch." And the design center manager said, "It's not red, it's magenta." And the guy said, "No, it's red. You know it's red. I know it's red." So they went back and forth on this. So the next level of discussion was that the Japanese safety person would escalate it to corporate, because the design center manager got, at the end of the discussion, we said, "Tell him to call corporate." So he called his corporate safety guy, who called me. So we go through the same thing. The guy says, "Why did you approve red for a non-emergency power switch? It's not red, it's magenta." So we dance back and forth on this thing. And he said, "I'm just going to stop it and stop the line. I'm going to stop the whole manufacturing." Now, when that happens, you see, he had the ability to do that. When your name would go like if there was an IBM newspaper, your name would be in headlines across the top. "Tom Hardy stops production line." Now, that's a huge revenue stream when you do something like that, you know, because it's manufacturing has an end date, and marketing's all scheduled for stuff, and revenue and business model, all this stuff. It's a financial system. So you don't want to be responsible for doing something like that. So when we decided that we were not agreeing with each other, then I told him, the next level up, said, as you know, is we escalate this. In a situation like this, and stopping the line, it goes to the CEO. Because my senior executive was the vice president of corporate communications, who reported at that time, John Akers, who was CEO. So we could get a meeting like that quickly. So I said, "Okay, look, I'm going to schedule it, because we have to get this thing settled, right? Too much is riding on this." So I just want to let you know, just a heads up, who I'm going to be bringing to the meeting today. I'm bringing Richard Sapper, who's the industrial designer, who's designing the ThinkPad product. And, you know, by the way, he's a preeminent industrial designer on the line, and blah, 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 blah. You know, a little background of Richard, but he's also an expert in color. And I'm also going to bring Paul Rand, who's our corporate graphic design consultant. He's an expert in color and designed the IBM logo and blah, 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 blah. So think about this for a minute. How many times do you get to have an escalation meeting in front of the IBM CEO? And do you want to spend that valuable time discussing the subjectivity between magenta and red against two experts? And I'm heading up the IBM design program. I'm also a designer. I also deal in color. So we're experts in color. And you know who the CEO is going to believe, right? Because this is a subjective decision here. And just think about it. I'll get the meeting set up. So the guy backed down. He backed down, and so then sent an email to Yamato, Japan, and said, "Now make them red," which they did. So that was a nice win with that. But those kinds of big things that happen, I miss the dynamics of a lot of that stuff, because it's really interesting. And you don't win all of them, you know. You lose some sometimes. That's just the way it is. But that one was special. Now, in parallel, by the way, to the safety argument, then we let advertising know about the red on it? So they had already started doing ads with the ad agency in preparation for the ThinkPad launch, touting the red dot, like the line is so hot they had to make it red. All that stuff was in the works. So they were spending millions of dollars on advertising using the red dot. The train had left the station on that. And so if for some reason the CEO had agreed with the safety guy on the color thing, then we would have to bring up the fact that there's all this millions of dollars being spent on advertising for this magenta piece here. And the CEO, in my view, would never have agreed to something like that if they knew it was going to basically waste all that money. So that was the backup if we had to pull that out, but we never had to go there with all of it. So that in a second color story, which is probably never been told before. I'll give you the insight into something that happened in IBM Germany with regards to black. So back in the it goes back to the late 70s. Germany the German government has DIN standards, DIN. I don't remember exactly what that stood for, but that was basically the abbreviation they used for standards for products, all sorts of standards, the DIN standards. And usually when Germany came out with a DIN standard, other companies in Europe followed them, particularly if it had to do with easy use. And so in the late 70s, the labor unions in Germany knew that computers were going to be coming into the workplace. It already started. And this was right before the PC business happened. And they commissioned some research that looked at ergonomics in a workplace. How do you set your chair? Do you have a footrest? Where do you put your arm positions? The thicknesses of keyboards, the luminous reflectance in terms of glare, specular reflectance, glare, and so forth. Because in Germany and most of Europe, as I remember, the labor unions were in the office, not just in factories or manufacturing or trucking. For example, they were in the office, white collar, and they had the decision-making power jointly with the company as to which computers could be bought and brought into that company, because they represented the employees, not corporate. And that's happened some, in this country, but it's still not as prevalent in this country. It never has been as it was in Europe. And again, in Germany, not only Germany, but in the rest of Europe, that was sort of the mode of operation back then. So the unions were supporting these DIN standards. And one of the DIN standards said that it gave specifications on what they call luminance reflectance, which was basically the value that you would see in your visual field. So for example, if you were, they argued that if you were looking at a white document, piece of paper with data typed on it, and you're having to take that data and key it in to the screen on the machine, then you might be looking at a white piece of paper and eventually looking around the screen, going back and forth like this. And so anything in the visual field, they argued, needed to be a certain luminous reflectance value, which is taking white on one screen and like a gray. So it's muted, no black at all. I can't remember the range right now, but it was basically from a white to a light gray, more of a warm gray color. So black was verboten to be on any kind of desktop machine like that. That doesn't mean you couldn't have a computer box sitting over the corner plugged into the wall that's cranking out stuff. That could be black, but not in the visual field that we use. So that's why, going back to the early PCs, everything was off-white or gray. I mean, I had some mock-ups of the first personal computer where I had Merimekko fabric, which is a Finnish from Finland, a very contemporary, popular fabric in color and different patterns. I even wrapped some of my mock-ups of the processor with it, where it would be, if it was manufactured, it would be painted that way. It's an option because it was user friendly, if you will, right? It had a very emotional side to it. You could have a neutral and the basic side for a business machine, but if you wanted to do something playful, you should do that. Well, that got killed on that product because of cost. But we had some people inside IBM, some of the human factors experts, who said, they didn't think that the test that the research folks did in Germany was really valid, and they had some reasons for that. And but Germany made it a DIN standard, and they marched with it. And IBM couldn't sell any products in Germany that didn't meet that standard. And at that point, I think maybe 50% of IBM's total revenue came from the other side of the Atlantic. So that was going to cut. If they couldn't sell products in that part of the world, then it was going to hurt. So as a design program, we had to basically mute all of our stuff, that fit within that visual field. So as time went on, there were more people that were voicing opinions about this luminous reflectance thing that really wasn't true. Somebody made I don't remember the whole argument, but it was something that ended up by saying, if you follow that, you couldn't see stars at night, something like that. But so I decided to fund an independent research project from a famous Swiss ergonomist, Grandjean, to independently look at the DIN standard, do research, and really tell us, is it right or not? And I said, I'm not, and we paid him, I paid him to do that. And I said, IBM's funding this, but it's for the industry. And we're not trying to stack the deck and tell you what we wanted one way or the other. Just tell us what's true. So he came back and basically said, it's not true. And this was a guy that Germany respected. And all the people in that field in the world respected this gentleman. So I took that report and I sent copies to all the computer companies, all the major computer companies, including Germany. I sent it to Apple, to HP, to Compaq, to Sun, back then, in Germany, Siemens, Nixdorf. Anyway, all the big computer companies, I sent that report. And the idea was to start to surround the German DIN standards, and all these other companies would start lobbying because they had people that would interface with the government on things like this. And so, meanwhile, that thing was at play. That was going on at the same time that the ThinkPad was going to be coming out in black. Now, the United States had no rules on that. The United States really didn't follow the German bin standards like other other countries in Europe did, like Sweden and Norway and so forth. And the Scandinavian companies were very big on ergonomics. And it still are. But the United States, you could basically do what you wanted to do, except companies that had to sell products in Europe, if you wanted the same, for cost reasons, if you wanted the same color on everything, where you didn't have to have a special color for one country, which is going to cost a lot more money, then by default, you followed the standards because that was worst case scenario. So we decided to use the ThinkPad as a vehicle to push black, no matter what was going on with the bin standard. Because we had that report from this expert in Switzerland, a neutral and well-respected person. And so IBM Germany, of course, wouldn't accept the black machine because they had to follow the bin standard. No matter what anybody said otherwise, expert or outside expert or not, the bin standard was on the books. That's the law. Talk, talk. We have to follow it. We're going to do it. You know, if it changes, we'll change it. But if it's in the books, they had to follow it, and we knew that. So we gave Germany the alternate color of a gray, a light gray ThinkPad that met the value of the DIN standards. And we said, this is what's going to cost you. Because everywhere else, it's going to be black. Well, Germany came unglued because the cost was going to be prohibitive, and they said, we can't accept black. You know, I mean, excuse me, we can't accept gray because it's going to cost too much. But we also don't want it to be black. So it's, well, you got one or the other. One meets the DIN standards and one doesn't. So if you're so strong about meeting the DIN standards, you pay for it. Of course, the product development people who would have to pay for it, they were kind of arguing. They started arguing with the safety guys because there was some public information started coming out about this German DIN standard test being a little flaky, with response in respect to the lumens reflectance issue. So I made a trip to IBM Germany to go through this with those guys. I took the report. I was going to talk to them more about it. And while I was there, I wanted to make a presentation to the president of IBM Germany. At that point, his name was Hans Olaf Hinkel. He was a big proponent of design, the most powerful IBM executive in Germany. And so, you know, I tried to do that across the corporation whenever you were at a location where there was an executive like that, particularly one who could help you with a friend of design. To set up a meeting and give them a personal presentation of products that are going on across IBM that they may not have anything to do with, but you want to show it to them because it gives them some insight into what design's doing and what's happening across the company. So I had some advanced products that were going on somewhere else that I thought he would find interesting. So I set up a meeting with him. So I go into his office and I couldn't believe my eyes. His desktop computer, you know, it was a CRT, and he had a processor box and a keyboard. It's painted black. I could not believe this. And I said, Hans Olaf, God, this is great looking machine. It's black. He said, yeah, I love black. I had my guys paint it black. And I didn't say anything about the safety guys or the dinner. I didn't bring anything up like that. I just put that in my pocket because I was going to pull that out with the safety guys later. And I couldn't believe how lucky I was to have had that meeting and see that product sitting there. It was black. So we got through with our meeting, and then I had later that day, I had the safety meeting. So I go into those guys and we talk about the Ranjan research thing, and they said, well, we know he's, this guy is famous, but we got the DIN standards and we have to adhere to all that. It's for the safety of German customers. That's why they do this stuff. And I said, well, look, what you're telling me is that the DIN standards are making it safer for people's visual system because their computers aren't black. Is that right? They go outside the box. If they go outside the box and then there's reflectance, there's going to be some kind of visual issue. They said, yes. And I said, don't you have some responsibility for IBM employees that would work in an environment like that, if they have black machines? And they said, oh, we don't do that in IBM. We don't have machines that don't meet the DIN standards. And so then I pulled this out of my pocket and said, have you ever been in President English office? And they said, no, we don't get it. We don't get there. These guys didn't go to the CEO or the president of IBM Germany. I said, well, you should go up there sometime because he's got a black desktop PC. So if you're so responsible for your employees, then wouldn't you say you're running the visual system of the IBM president or president of IBM Germany by letting him have a black machine? Well, they couldn't say anything to that. It was a beautiful moment. And so I said, look, the bottom line of this is we're doing the black ThinkPad worldwide. If you don't want it, you can do the gray. It's going to cost more, but that's IBM Germany's decision to make. So we gave you, design gave you two colors, one that meets the DIN standards, and then the black one we're selling everywhere else, so they don't care about the DIN standards. And they said, well, we know that the product people don't want that and blah, blah, blah. But they said, we'll go talk to the product managers and try to get them to get the gray one that meets the DIN standard and argue with them about cost. Okay, that's what they did. So they went and the guys wouldn't pay them money. So what their solution was, on the cover of the operating manual of the first IBM ThinkPad 700C that was sold in IBM Germany, it was printed, not for office use. Because only in the office where the unions were would you enforce that DIN standard. It was like unbelievable. That was unbelievable, And I can't remember. Maybe it was several months, or maybe it was a year after all that. They took that standard out of the books in Germany. It was shown finally. A lot of people told them that this is wrong. I don't know, maybe some people tried to sue them. I don't know what happened exactly, but we got the word that it's no longer required. So then, like ThinkPads went everywhere, but no problem. But printing not for office use is just like unbelievable. So I don't think I've ever told that story before.
That's awesome. Thanks. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like I heard rumors because there is a museum in Germany, very, very small one, that has one of the beige ThinkPads. And they do mention something along the lines of this one was available in very, very small quantities, but the information as to why and how and all of the history and I don't know if the right word is politics behind it. Don't use in the office. That's like don't write written on the side of a pen.
Yeah, I mean, and you know that people use it in the office.
Oh yeah.
Maybe they had some strict union guys and went right by the DIN standards, but they're I would say probably the majority of the people, and particularly people in small offices, or if you have it at your house, you don't care about
or
that.
Maybe they just said, "Oh, this isn't black; it's dark brown."
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, do you have a pocket colorimeter? Do you know this is actually black?
Yeah,
That
I know.
is incredible. So, you obviously worked on that very first ThinkPad, and to say it was a revolution is probably to sell its legacy short. But it wasn't the only one that you worked on. You worked on the brand for a number of years. Was there any kind of like highlight or favorite moment for you during your time working on the ThinkPad brand that you recall?
Well, I think overall, the favorite moment of that was achieving four basic pieces of that. One is to sell it as a simple box in black with a red track point and a color display. And so all those things were really, I mean, a lot of people were part of doing that, obviously, between engineering, manufacturing, and all that, but it was driven by design initially. And so, and they were all part of differentiation. So they were expressing that new personality strategy that you put together. And so that was very rewarding when that happened. And then the product was a huge success. So, that makes you feel good when that happens, and particularly when you're going through all the battles and some of the stories I shared with you, that one goes through, inside a big organization like that, to try to get something different through the system. So I think it was the one thing was being able to achieve differentiation on a very important thing.
Oh, right on.
And a lot of that was also managing the process. How do you sell it? How do you convince somebody to do something when they don't want to do it? Or how do you make it come in from the other side where somebody else helps you sell it or something else? So that's to me, that's the fun part of management in situations like that. It's figuring out how to solve the problem, in a creative way, and don't give up trying to do it. And if you're in a function like in a corporate function and you have some leverage, you do things like that, and to roll the dice and take a chance, and then it's rewarding when you win. And there can be some really crazy things happen. I remember one time, it's not on the ThinkPad, but it's a design management story about making argument and trying to get the right thing. One of the graphic design managers came to me one day and said, "You're going to get a phone call from an executive vice president Now, IBM has a lot of private vice presidents, but executive vice presidents, not a ton of those. They were people in authority, like running business units and so forth. So he said, I've argued with this guy on the phone. He wants a type size larger on his executive business card. He said, I told him that there's nothing in the file about legibility problems. Paul Rand designed it. It's fine. IBM's not going to spend money just to do a one-off business card just because, with all due respect, sir, to your position, it's a subjective thing. So this guy wouldn't take no for an answer. So he said, well, you have to call my manager. So he called me, and I think him through the same argument. And he just wasn't giving up. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, he's already taken up the time of my dad, the design manager. Now I'm thinking we've got more important things to do for this company than to argue about this with this guy. It's just subjective. So I decided to try to end the conversation. And so I said, I have a way for you, you can make your type size larger on your card. You hold it closer to your face. So the guy hung up on me, and I never heard from him again. And I like doing that kind of stuff. Now, this guy was way above my pay grade, but I had the authority to do that because we represented the brand. And thank goodness, when the folks that put together the IBM design program in the beginning put it as corporate policy. So there were things like in the Bible, in the corporation, that there's certain things that design adjudicates and has some control over. And if you get the argument down to just I like it, I don't like it, between somebody who's not within the system, with either the job or the credentials to make an aesthetic decision like that, then don't waste the time. That's what we hire design professionals and consultants for, is to make those decisions. Excuse me. There was another similar one, not quite like that, but it was with an executive vice president. There was a software package that was designed for a prototype that was being done in development. And when I got to the corporate office, I saw this box sitting somewhere, and I thought, what was that? Because Rand does all the packaging, and we had a system for that. And that wasn't Paul's work. It was like this amateur thing. Had IBM logo on it, some picture. So I went in and asked them, what is this box? And they said, well, this is something, there's a prototype piece of software that's being done. It's not a product right now. And so, we're testing it with people. And so we wanted a box to put it in. So Joe or whatever had a friend of his designed this sort of thing, and that's what we did. Well, so it wasn't live. It wasn't being produced. Thank goodness. And I knew when it went live, then it would come into the system, and Paul would do it with the family of designs we had and all this kind of stuff. So it went live. Paul got the job. He did the design. It was beautiful product design that he did. Product representing the software product. And so it got approved by programming management. We had to make the approval. We put it through the system like that. They didn't argue about it one way or the other, because they own getting the software or the hardware out. So they at least have to. They're responsible for the product, hardware, software financially, getting it out the door. So out of respect for that, they have to look at it. If they don't like something, then they come to the management and we have a discussion about it. but we didn't have a lot of that at that point in time. So, as I remember, the deadline for releasing that artwork to production was like the week after something I'm going to tell you. And I get a phone call, excuse me, from this executive vice president who's in programming business. And I think he was over a good bit of the software development. And he said, you know, the product name, I forget the name of it now. He said, I saw a new package and I like the old one that I saw when it was being tested better than the new one, the latest. Why is that? And I said, well, you tell me, why don't you like it? I said, the current one was done by our corporate consultant. It's part of our brand identity, and we have a family and system we're using, and blah, blah, blah. He said, I just don't like it. He said, I'm responsible for the software. I don't like it. It's not like the old one. And so he said, I've already taken the initiative to schedule a meeting with Vice President of Communications and you to escalate this. So he escalated me to the Vice President of Communications. So the meeting got set up at the corporate office, and I go and I take all the boards of all the software, the system, and what Paul did for it, and I took the old thing in there, and I gave the story. And the Vice President of Communications is she turns to the guy and says, I like the new one. I think the story is solid. Paul does great work, and it's part of our corporate identity family, and you can see the system here. And so I support design in this argument. He pulls out a little report. I didn't know he was going to bring this. I learned a lesson. He pulls out a little report, and he hands me a copy, and he hands Vice President a copy. And what it is, he said, this report is from a survey that we did with IBM customers, because this was a B2B piece of software. Also, the businesses that we serve overwhelmingly like the old, as opposed to the new. Now, this is not a functional thing, this image, this is just represents what the software does. You know, it's just a graphic image like the cover of a magazine. It has nothing to do with software functionality, or safety, or anything. It's subjective. So he said, we have to listen to our customer. Okay, so now, see, he's bringing out the customer side of this now. Now, I know the Vice President well enough to know that she's just not going to turn a blind eye to that. So she turns to me and said, do you have anything like this that can refute that supports Paul's design? Well, we didn't go out and do focus groups on Rand's designs. That's just not what we did. It wasn't designing for the lowest common denominator, frankly. It was doing something that was advanced and high quality, and Rand had a track record in that, and that's why he did this kind of work. So I knew that if I said I didn't have anything, I might lose this. But I can't lie about it either. So these are kind of management decisions that you have to make sometimes in situations like that on the spot. It's kind of a do or die thing. So I said, I was vaguely specific. Vaguely specific is an art, by the way. So I was vaguely specific in that I said, I didn't bring it with me. Now, what I didn't say is the reason I didn't bring it with me is I didn't have it. I didn't say that. I didn't say that part. That part I left out. So I was vague about that, but I was specific about the point that I didn't bring it. So I said, look, thank goodness, this was at the end of the day on a Friday. And so my office was in Stanford. You know, it was about, I don't know, half hour away from Armonk, where we were meeting with the vice president. So she said, okay, let's have a meeting Monday afternoon, because this artwork had to get released that week, the production. So we had to make this decision quick if something was going to get reversed at like 0 hour. Okay, so we end the meeting, we scheduled it for like, I don't know, 4 o'clock or something on Monday afternoon. So as soon as I got out of that meeting, I called a guy in New York City who worked for a research company, who does work with, for IBM. We did customer behavior work. We never ignored the customer in that respect, but we didn't. When you're giving something to a highly qualified designer like that, and it's for an image on a package that had nothing to do with functionality, it had nothing to do with safety, it was design, and you're giving it to somebody like Paul Rand, then you're not going to spend money or time doing a taste test with that. And so anyway, I said, I know it's Friday afternoon, but I've got a critical issue here I've got to resolve. I'm going to hop on the train and come down to the city. They're about Armonk train station is about an hour and a half away or something like that. So I went down to the city and I had all my stuff with me, and I showed him the material, told him what the issue was, and I said, what I need from you, I need you to run a survey. And I gave him the definition of the type of customer, the business. And I can't remember the exact number, but it was twice as many as this guy had. If he had 100, I don't remember what it was now. I wanted 200. And they're going to say if they like this one or that. And of course, this guy, he knew Rand's work. He said, oh, this whole thing was just a piece of junk. He said, who did this? I said, I don't know. It was just some prototype thing they made. Wasn't serious. And so he said, okay, I'll have you. I said, I want 3 copies in Armonk by like 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon. And so it cost me $10,000. Now, this was like in 1990, I think it was, something like that. But we had budgets for stuff like that. In fact, an interesting sidebar is in the corporate office is the only function in IBM that didn't have purchase, which meant, because that's where the buck stopped on stuff. So you never knew when you were going to have situations where you had to adjudicate something and make a change at 0 hour. So you didn't have time to go through and make the purchase order, get it approved by 2 levels of management and all this stuff. You were given a budget, and you're trusted to have that budget, and you manage it and spend it however you want to spend it, on certain things. If you went over your budget, you might get maxed at the end, but it was your responsibility to do that. So Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock, the reports show up. I opened it up, and they overwhelmingly like Paul's design. Twice as many people were surveyed as the other. And so I took that in, passed it out, and we got into the meeting. And my vice president looked at that. So they closed it up, told the guy, as far as I'm concerned, it's done. We're going with Paul's design. If you want to escalate it, let's go see John. He's the CEO. I'll set up the meeting. And the guy back off. And frankly, I don't care if the guy did that in his basement with his kids, or he went down the street, because it was was not the right thing to do for the company, was to put out something like that based on somebody else's subjective opinion who weren't qualified to make a decision. So anyway, those are a couple of management stories that relate to the job in that kind of situation of having what it takes sometimes to get the best design out the door. You know. And when you win, it's great. Sometimes you lose. Win some, you lose some. Some are rained out, and some shouldn't have been scheduled in the first place. I heard that somewhere. I'm not sure. I think that was about marriage, actually.
Oh man, I bet that did feel good.
Oh, yeah, that was a real good one.
So with this October coming up, ThinkPad's going to be turning 30 years old, and like that's a long time for especially a computer brand to stick around, especially one that is just as recognizable now as it was back when it started.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot of brands that can say it's still the same color, it still has the track point, it's still. And because you were there at literally the beginning of it all, I was just wondering if you had any kind of thoughts or reflections, lasting impressions on just ThinkPad over the last 30 years.
Well, I think part of the basic reason it's lasted a long time is that the concept was simple, it was direct. You know, ThinkPad was a professional product. It was higher priced than a lot of other notebooks. It was a premium brand. And it had this kind of an essence of, I'm not going to say formality to it, but maybe it was. It was the elements, because it was simple. It wasn't over the top. It was restrained, but it was quality. All the decisions, the visual decisions that were made were very thoughtful, without being frivolous. It was, one could say it was understated elements, if you will. So that was the basic concept that was done, of course, and you have to credit Richard Sapper with that basic idea. And of course, designer Kaji Yamazaki worked with him to implement the whole thing. So now, after the first one, you know, the guidelines and the family approach to that was communicated in the company, that don't make the second model something else. This needs to continue as a family. And frankly, in a lot of IBM products, that, because IBM is a systems thinking company, that was a normal way to follow it. If you had something that worked and it was the right thing to do, and there was no need to make a new model every year, you know, like our automobiles in the 1950s, where the whole thing changed every year. There are a lot of economies to that. You know, there are economies of cost. It was the parts you could use. There was economies of developing something within a known form factor that you can use the knowledge from the last one and continue that. But I give a ton of credit, frankly, to David Hill, because, you know, after the ThinkPad became very successful, then there had to be somebody brought in to be more to manage that system, not just be a design center manager over a certain amount of certain types of products that came out. So it had to take control of that and ensure that the design concept remained true to the initial idea, knowing that technology is going to change, things are going to get thinner, there are going to be more functions, less functions here, more functions there, stuff is going to happen. But to maintain the same concept and the fundamental character of that. And I love the way that David used the Porsche 911 as an analogy for managing the ThinkPad. Because, you know, he talked to management in IBM about that. And of course, after IBM sold the ThinkPad to Lenovo, as you know, David became vice president of design in Lenovo and basically had the same fundamental job of managing the ThinkPad character in that new company he was working for. Excuse me. A lot of people, I'm sure, wanted to change things, you know, because you get a cycle of executives that come through companies like that, you know, particularly something on the fast track. They'll come in and they'll have a product role and they'll do something and they'll move on, but so they're not going to be there for a long time. So maybe they want to make their own mark. And if they're coming into a very important product like that, well, maybe they think they want to do something that could put their stamp on it, you know, as opposed to just bought. So it's not an easy thing to do, is to do what David did over the length of time that he did. So he's a good friend. We still keep in touch, you know, and he had me actually come in and do some consulting with Lenovo early in the program for a bit, just to get kind of an outsider perspective on some things. And that was really an honor for me to be brought in to do that. And in fact, a lot of the IBM designers from both Raleigh, where David was, and Japan, transitioned into Lenovo employees. So they were all at these meetings. So it was very interesting and a rewarding experience to do that. So again, I think that it's a huge job to keep something going like that for so long. So that's why I credit him with being the leader to make that happen.
I have to agree. One of the times I've sat down with David, he told me of a story when he introduced the concept of purposeful evolution and the challenges that he had, exactly as you described, with different people coming in and being like, well, what's the next ThinkPad going to look like and how is it going to be different? And he's like, well, what do you mean different? And I don't think he ever said who gave him the advice, but it was one of the higher ups. And he's like, what am I supposed to do? And he was told to just ignore him. He'll be gone in like 3 weeks. He's got, you know, he's heading to another job. Just ignore him.
Yeah, there we go.
And I'm thinking, wow, that would be a call you'd have to, or a piece of advice you need to take on faith. And I'm like, so let me get this straight. Your advice is for me to ignore this person.
Yeah, there you go. No,
so
that was good advice.
Right on. Well, you know what, Tom, I think we've blasted through in one way or another the questions that I had prepared. The only question I have left is that, was there anything left unsaid? Because I certainly don't want to have an instance where you're like, we didn't talk about that and I really wanted to share it.
We covered a lot of ground.
We sure did.
Um, well, I would say that another decision that David made helped with the continuity of ThinkPad, and that was bringing Richard Sampler in as a consultant to Lenovo. But when he did that, Richard was still a consultant to IBM. Now, but the fact that IBM sold their PC business, including the ThinkPad, to Lenovo, I think helped with doing that, because had it been any other computer company, IBM wouldn't let their consultant go to work for a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a special situation, and David and I both respected Richard, so much, and really we worked with him closely for a number of years, and so we understood the genius of that man and what he can bring to the table, and it's quite an asset. And so I think making this decision and selling it inside Lenovo to bring Richard in was, I think, was an important management move. And we both miss him too. He's just a great guy.
I don't know what to say, Tom. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. It brings back. I'm sorry if I start rambling. I go off on one direction because something I say it dredges up another story in my head of something that related to it. So I hope I didn't go off track too much.
Oh no. If anything, it was just like, here's the story, and like all good storytellers, the story is only amplified by the other stories around it that lift it up. Like to know that the ThinkPad, we wanted it black. Okay, fine. But all of those other stories around why it was black, the challenges of it being black, the changes in the industry that occurred in Germany, especially because it was black, the work that you did, getting that study done and sharing it, that tactic, like all of that you bring up, it all comes together. So no, it's fantastic.